Alexander Nisbet on 2 Peter. From the Puritan Board, Alexander Nisbet, Scottish Presbyterian, 1623 to 1669, was a covenanting minister and one of the select biblical commentators in David Dickson's group of Scottish expositors. He published commentaries on Ecclesiastes and 1 and 2 Peter. He was ejected from his pulpit for nonconformity in 1662. 2 Peter 2, verse 12. But these, as natural brute beasts, made to be taken and destroyed, speak evil of the things they don't understand, and shall utterly perish in their own corruption. The apostle having shown how unlike these false teachers, who despise magistracy and government among Christians, are to the most glorious creatures of God, the good angels. He shows here how like they are in this and the rest of their carriage to the basest of the creatures, the brute beasts, and the resemblances between them which the apostle's words may lead us to are especially three. Number 1, as the beasts are void of human reason, so are they of heavenly wisdom. Number 2, as the beasts do rapidly trample underfoot the most precious things, so that they speak evil of the things they don't understand, whereby is especially meant their opposing of magistracy and government among Christians, and their slandering of the doctrine of holiness, so much pressed by the apostles, as if it had been contrary to the liberty of Christians. Number 3, as the beasts are framed for destruction, so are they for utter perdition, which is not to be understood as if they that have immortal souls could come to nothing as the beasts, but that they are appointed for eternal torment, which they do procure to themselves, as the beast is appointed for the slaughter. Hence learn, number 1, however men of erroneous opinions and vile affections may be in so high esteem in the church by reason of their fair pretenses, and the specious titles they assume to themselves as to draw a very considerable faction therein after them, yet does the Lord esteem such, and will in his own time discover them to be what they are in effect, base and beastly in their disposition and carriage. For here are these false teachers who pretended to be the only fountains of consolation to the church, verse 17, and patrons of Christian liberty, verse 19, by such fair pretenses gaining to themselves a numerous party, are declared by the Spirit of the Lord to be as natural brute beasts. When men are led by their sensual appetite, not by holy reason, and do become very adventurous in passing most hard sentences against things they understand least, they have then the characters of a beastly disposition and carriage. For both these are here made resemblances between the beasts and false teachers, who as natural brute beasts speak evil of the things they understand not. When men do thus resemble the beasts in their disposition and carriage, it is the clearest evidence that can be that they are appointed for destruction, as the beast is for the slaughter, and that however they may, as fed beasts, prosper for a time, yet their end shall be much worse than others. For the apostle makes the resemblance also in this, that as the beast is to be taken and destroyed, so they shall utterly perish. The punishment that abides the wicked consists in a thorough and continual torment of soul and body, and a deprivation of all comfort, and that to all eternity, without any hope of recovery, which is imported in this, they shall utterly perish. Whatever destruction comes upon wicked men, it is of their own procuring. They do in time by their sin treasure up the wrath and gather the fuel which shall seize upon them and burn them up to all eternity, for they shall utterly perish in their own corruption. Verse 13, and shall receive the reward of unrighteousness, as they count it pleasure to riot in the daytime. Spots they are and blemishes, sporting themselves with their own deceivings while they feast with you. Having eyes full of adultery, and that cannot cease from sin, beguiling unstable souls, and heart they have exercised with covetous practices. Cursed children. Here is a further application of the sin and judgment of these false teachers whom the apostle has formally described and threatened. The substance whereof is that they shall lack nothing of the wrath due to those who count it their heaven to exceed in all carnal delights, notwithstanding of the light of the gospel, by this disgracing their holy profession and making but a sport of deceiving their own souls, since they can in the meantime deceive others, insinuating themselves in the esteem and society of the godly, whether in their religious or ordinary feasts. Verse 13. Who are so under the power of their unclean lusts that they cannot but manifest their filthy disposition, being altogether impotent to resist temptations themselves, and ensnaring with their errors and vile practices such others as are not well settled in knowledge and grace, and who are so sold to love of their gain that they make it their heart exercise to attain to it, for all which the apostle pronounces them heirs of God's fearful curse. Doctrine. Number 1. The wrath of God against sin had need to be oft inculcated to the guilty, and knit to the several branches of their sin, that so they may have the more lively apprehensions of that wrath, and may have their hearts accustomed to think upon it whensoever they think upon their sins, that so they may be either stopped in the course of their sin and hastened to repentance, or left the more inexcusable. Therefore the apostle, in branching out the sin of false teachers and their followers, does so frequently intermix threatenings, or some new representation of that wrath they have to expect. They shall utterly perish in the former verse, and here they shall receive the reward of unrighteousness, and they are cursed children. Number 2. When God reckons with the wicked, they shall not lack a grain weight of the wrath due to them. For since they have slighted the use making of Christ's righteousness, which makes sinners righteous, and the study of holiness, which proves them righteous, they shall receive the reward of unrighteousness, which in the original signifies a due proportion of wrath to their sin. Number 3. That which ripens wicked men for wrath is not their sins only, simply considered, but mainly the several aggravations ordinarily attending their sins, and which there may be seen here 9 in number. 1. This does exceedingly aggregate men's sins, when they count it their very paradise to satisfy their lusts. For so the word is in the original. They count it their Eden to riot. The more heaven men apprehend in their sins, the more hell they will find. 2. When men become so impudently bent upon their lusts that neither the light of the world's knowledge of their sin, nor the light of the word discovering the evil and hazard of it restrains them, both which may be comprehended in this other aggravation of their sin, they count it pleasure to riot in the daytime. Number 3. When men by their sins stain a holy profession that they have made before the world. For if these men had not had a fair profession and high esteem in the church, they could not have been spots and blemishes, while they feasted with the Lord's people, which is here made another aggravation of their guilt. Number 4, when men do not only live in sin, but make a sport of it, beguiling their own hearts with groundless apprehensions that there is neither such evil nor hazard in them, as the word holds forth, and their own conscience sometimes suggests. For this is another aggravation, they sport themselves in their own deceivings. Number 5, when in the meantime of their living in the slavery of their lust, they are careful to keep up their esteem with the godly, and attend all occasions of converse with them, that so they may cloak their sins. For it is here made another aggravation of their guilt, that all this wickedness is committed while they feast with the Lord's people. Number 6, when men's lusts are so vigorous within that they manifest their predominancy in this very outward carriage. For this is a further aggravation of their sin. They have eyes full of adultery. Number 7, when men become so impotent to resist their lusts that the satisfying of them becomes their very element, out of which they cannot rest, as the word here signifies, they cannot cease from sin, which is also another aggravation of their guilt. Number 8, when sinners become infectious, ensnaring with a bait of fair pretenses, as the word beguiling in the original signifies, many others to swallow down their foul errors and profane practices. This also is a high aggravation of their guilt. 9, when men make it their hard exercise, whereabouts they spend their wit and affections to fulfill their fleshly desires. For this is here the last aggravation of their sin, and heart they have exercised with covetous practices. Doctrine. Number 4. Although it be possible that the Lord's people may, without guiltiness, admit into their ordinary and intimate society the worst of men, while they do not discover themselves, as is clear concerning Ahithophel and Judas, yet does the admission of such into their society oftentimes prove a great snare, especially to those that are admitted, while they take occasion from this to harden themselves in those sins, and account the less of that vileness, the commission whereof does not mar their esteem in society with the godly. For this is one thing that helped these soul deceivers to deceive themselves, and willingly to overlook the evil of their own condition, that notwithstanding of all their wickedness, they were admitted to the society of the godly, and passed among them for such, while they feast with you. When men labor not to mortify their inward lusts, the Lord oftentimes justly allows them to manifest the predominancy of these lusts over them in their outward carriage, as grace which is lively within will put some beauty upon the outward man, Ecclesiastes 8:1. So corruptions vigorous within will readily betray the person to be its slave, Isaiah 3:9. Having eyes full of adultery, or as it is in the original, of the adulteress. So bewitching is the spirit of error where it enters, and so devoted are deluded souls to their seducing teachers, that though these teachers be judicially plagued of God, as ordinarily such are, with profanity of life, yet this does not make their followers loathe them or abhor their errors. For though they did riot in the daytime and had eyes full of adultery, yet were they still beguiling unstable souls. Those who are not rooted in knowledge by clear information and frequent meditation of the truth, and have not their hearts established with grace by the frequent exercise of it, will readily be a prey to soul deceivers. For those whom they beguile are here called unstable souls. No man serves one idol alone, but many at once. He that is wedded to worldly pleasures will be also wedded to his credit. The lack of this mars his pleasure, and if pleasure and credit be two of man's idols, ready gain will be the third, that he may the more easily attain to the other two. Therefore the apostle describes these men here as slaves to all these three idols at once, to their pleasures, which were their Eden, to their credit, which made them hold forth baits to take many followers, and to their gain, in which their heart was exercised, that so their pleasure and credit might be attained and upheld. Lastly, they who profess themselves to be the children of the Lord, but spend their immortal spirits upon the unworthy things of this present life, not trusting to his care and providence and the moderate use of lawful means, whereunto their profession does oblige them, forfeit the right they pretend to have to the privilege of his children, and serve themselves heirs to his curse. For because their heart is exercised with covetous practices, they are cursed children. Verse 15 and 16. Which have forsaken the right way, and are gone astray, following the way of Balaam, the son of Besor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness, but was rebuked for his iniquity. The dumb ass speaking with man's voice forbade the madness of the prophet. The apostle, having shown what idols these false teachers set up, shows here two woeful effects that their love to them, especially to their gain, had upon them. The first is their apostasy from the truth and way of Christ. The second is extreme violence in the prosecution of these idols, which he sets forth by comparing them with Balaam, who was so mad in the prosecution of these same idols that even extraordinary opposition could not restrain him. Hence, learn number 1. However, men that really enter the way of Christ can never totally or finally fall from it, by reason of the Lord's undertaking, John 10:28, and unchangeableness, Romans 11:29. Yet they who have been once in opinion sound and in external practice blameless, remaining in the meantime without any inward saving change, may make apostasy from both. For such had these men been, of whom the apostle says they have forsaken the right way. Number 2, love to some unmortified lust, especially covetousness, is a prime cause both of much apostasy and of extreme violence and sinful courses. For so it was with these false teachers and their followers. Their heart was exercised with covetous practices in the former verse, and therefore they forsook the right way, imitating Balaam in the violent prosecution of that idol. Number 3, when the right way, which is the way of truth and holiness, is forsaken, men can keep no certain course, but must needs be like wandering stars or planets, as the word here signifies, ever seeking and never finding that true satisfaction they might have had, and have forsaken the right way, and are gone astray. Number 4, when the Lord's ordinary means to reclaim sinners from their lust does not prevail with them, the Lord is justly provoked to give them up to go on in their way, over the belly of more than ordinary opposition, if they have it, until they perish. For Balaam was not restrained by means more ordinary in his time, and therefore he is not reclaimed by means more extraordinary. He loved the wages of unrighteousness, though he was rebuked for his iniquity by the dumb ass. Number 5, covetousness, being once rooted in the heart, and proposed as a man's main end. It is such a powerful idol that it will make the covetous man adventure upon any course, though never so unrighteous, and go over never so much opposition in the way of his gain. For though the wages that Balaam desired were wages of unrighteousness, because they could not be had but by cursing the people whom God had blessed, yet he loved them and pursued them, though the dumb ass forbade his madness in so doing. Number 6, the more opposition from the word or dispensations of God men do go over in the prosecution of their lusts, the greater is their guilt, and the more wrath have they to expect from God, especially when they trace the steps of sinners, whom God has by his word and providence opposed before them. For it is here made an aggravation of sin, and cause a special measure of wrath, that these men follow the way of Balaam, who would go on after his lusts, though the dumb ass speaking with man's voice forbade his madness. 7. It is in some respects more easy to work the greatest miracle in nature than to stop the course of a sinner violently pursuing his lusts. The reasonless creatures who have no active opposition in them to their Maker's will, being more prone to obey him, contrary to their ordinary course, than reasonable creatures without special grace and assistance can be, either to follow the direction of his word or their own reason, contrary to their corrupt and vile affections. For while Balaam goes on in a sinful course, a dumb ass, speaking as if it had a man's voice, forbade his madness. Number 8. A cross-providence, meeting sinners in a course contrary to the revealed will of the Lord, has a language to them, proclaiming their madness and prohibiting them to go on in their sins, which they ought to hear and obey, although it be not so express as when one man reproves another. Micah 6:9. For though we don't read in Numbers 22 that Balaam's ass did either expressly call him mad or prohibit his course, yet here the Spirit of God puts that commentary upon what it spake, which also Balaam should have done, that the dumb ass speaking with man's voice forbade the madness of the prophet. Number 9. It is the height of madness to walk contrary to the revealed will of God. How much use of reason soever men may have to cover their wickedness and attain to their idols. For though much carnal reason and policy did appear in Balaam's way, yet the dumb ass forbade the madness of the prophet. Number 10. A man who is mad in the pursuit of his lusts, and so incorrigible that even extraordinary means do not reclaim him, may notwithstanding be employed by the Lord for revealing of his will to his people, and for the edifying of his church, and in the discharge of that employment may be furnished with much heavenly matter and suitable expressions, and ought to be heard and obeyed by the church in the discharge of his employment, while he is not discovered to be what he is, and is not according to the order established in the house of God, put from that employment. For such a man was Balaam, whom the Lord did employ, and by whom he did deliver most comfortable and edifying truths to his church, all which is clear by comparing this place of Scripture with Numbers 21 and 22. Verse 17. These are wells without water, clouds that are carried with a tempest, to whom the mist of darkness is reserved forever. And this, in the two following verses, the apostle holds forth several of those means which false teachers make use of for attaining their forenamed idols, especially their gain and applause. The first, which is in this verse, is their fair promises of doing much good to the church. They give out themselves to be well springs of comfort to the Lord's people, and clouds to drop down their doctrine as rain, to make the church fruitful, while in effect they did but disappoint poor souls and darken the truth, for which the apostle threatens them with everlasting darkness as their portion. Hence learn, number 1, they that do most hurt to the souls of the Lord's people by venting most dangerous errors among them, make oftentimes the fairest promises of doing most good to them, that so they may feed people with vain expectations of more than ever they can find from them. Faithful ministers, being sensible of their own insufficiency, 2 Corinthians 3:5, and of the necessity of divine concurrence with their pains, 1 Corinthians 3:7, are more ready to express their fears of people's disappointment, 2 Corinthians 11:2 and 3, than to make such large promises of much comfort and profit to people by their means as false teachers do. For here these seducers give out themselves to be what faithful ministers ought to be, wells of consolation, receiving from Christ a fountain and giving out to his people what may comfort them, and clouds to drop down their doctrine as rain in season, to make them fruitful. Number 2, whatever be the fair pretenses and promises of false teachers, the Lord's people can meet with nothing but disappointment from them. And whatever esteem they may have among the best for a time, God will take his own time to manifest what they are in effect, and to undeceive his own people. For here they that give out themselves and were esteemed to be the chief instruments of the comfort and fruitfulness of the church, as a similitude of wells and clouds in which they set out themselves to import, are here discovered to be such as to disappoint, and in disappointing increase the anxiety of those that expected comfort from them. as wells without water to the weary traveler, and to be such as are acted by the restless spirit of Satan into every direction, where their forenamed idols of gain and acceptance can be had, as clouds that are carried with a tempest. The judgment of false teachers, whereof their followers shall get a share, shall be very proportionable to their sin, for they promise to be wells of consolation to the Lord's people, and disappoint them. They themselves delight to walk and to lead others in the works of darkness. They darken the truth of God, and in this course they are restless as clouds carried with a tempest. And therefore the threatening is exactly suited to these sins. For them the mist of darkness is reserved forever. Verse 18, for when they speak great swelling words of vanity, they allure through the lusts of the flesh. Through much wantonness, those that were clean escape from them who live in error. Here is the next course which soul deceivers take to ensnare poor souls by their errors. A high and lofty style of language with their love to their lusts made them to affect, and in which they were very taking with unmortified wanton professors, especially such as have been turned from paganism to the profession of Christianity. Hence learn, number 1, they that vent error do ordinarily hold it forth under some lofty strain of language and high-bended expressions beyond what is ordinary, such as may be most taking with and admired by the hearers, whilst faithful ministers can trust Christ to make plain truth spoken in a simplicity of words, effectual for the salvation, comfort, and edification of its own, which is their main scope, 1 Corinthians 2 verse 4. For it is here a character of false teachers, they speak great swelling words. When the veil of odd and soaring expressions in which false teachers delight is laid aside, and the naked purpose held forth under them is considered, it will be found of no worth, but either some untruth, or that which makes nothing to the true advantage of souls, both which are vanity. For here the great swelling words are words of vanity. Number 3, an affected, lofty style of language and uttering things divine, ordinary flows from some unmortified lust in the speaker, especially the love of applause, and is also mainly taken with wanton, unhumbled souls when it provokes to more vanity and lightness, by diverting them from the study of their natural vileness, their need of Jesus, and the necessity of the mortification of their heart evils. For they who speak great swelling words of vanity allure through the lusts of the flesh, through much wantonness, both which last clauses may be understood of the principle which bends a preacher to that strain, and also of the qualification of those hearers with whom it is most taking. Number 4, there may be a very remarkable external change from vile and blasphemous opinions, idolatrous and profane practices, to a profession of truth and suitableness of the outward conversation to it, where there is no saving or inward change made of the heart, from the love of secret lust to the love of Christ and his grace. The one without the other may be occasioned by the power of example, the majesty and clearness of truth, which is in nothing contrary to nature's light, the beauty of holiness shining in the conversation of professors, and outward advantages which sometimes may attend the profession of truth and holiness. For these here who were yet given to the lusts of their flesh and much wantonness had once clean escaped from the blasphemous opinion and profane and idolatrous practices of those without the church, who are here called them that live in error. Number 5, whatever change of this sort be worked upon men, unless they labor to find the power of Christ's Spirit changing their nature and mortifying their inward lusts, they will easily be a prey to seducing spirits, and carried to those sins which are no less dishonorable to God and destructive to their own souls than those in which they lived before. For here those who had once clean escaped from the vile opinions and wicked practices in which pagans live are now by the seduction of false teachers turned profane and licentious Christians.